Africa is a continent open to possibility, which comes to life when those with ambition and courage find the right partner, a partner with the tenacity to stand by them and light up a continent. With the experience and unique insights to go beyond limits, Absa Group Limited is that partner. We are synonymous with stability, transparency, and innovative thinking in financial services based on a legacy of 100 years of seamless execution across Africa. Our new brand and growth strategy define how we are shaping our destiny as a proudly African bank, inspired by Africanacity. This is the distinctly African ability to always find ways to get things done. Africanacity is what drives us, what sets the tone for our business, and echoes across our African footprint. Our corporate and investment banking business challenges limits. We close distances, connecting people to opportunities across borders, languages, and cultures. With global connectivity and local differentiation, we operate at the core of your strategy. Our understanding of each unique environment across regulatory and market practices results in a differentiated service and experience for our broad range of clients. Backed by insights into key sectors, we turn risks into opportunities, supported by a unique set of solutions that work across your full value chain. Our clients experience a seamless partnership across Africa, with aligned delivery positioning you for success across operating environments. Because African ingenuity and tenacity go beyond limits, so do we. Our world-class service is based on skills and expertise that have been developed to put our clients first, proven by numerous high-profile deals and coveted international awards. We are brave, we are passionate, we are ready. We are independently African, and we believe in building courageous partnerships that work. When you have the bravery to imagine and the will to get things done, that's Africanacity. That's Absa. Corporate and Investment Banking.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us for this virtual discussion where we're going to be talking about changing consumer trends and just what sort of develops we've been seeing in this COVID and post-COVID world that we're in. My name is Jeff Gable. I'm lucky enough to be Chief Economist for Absa Group. You're joined today on the call by a colleague of mine, the Head of Consumer Goods and Services at CIB, Isana Cordier. And then we have two expert guests that really provide the color and interest for us today. We have Anthony Leeming, the Chief Executive of Sun International, and we have also Mark Sturton, the CFO of Mr. Price Group. So in the hour we have with you today, we've got an awful lot to discuss. I think we're going to be able to add an awful lot of value to your thoughts around sort of the consumer segment and sort of the next steps forward. The first part of the day is a little bit of a macro talk. And so I can imagine everyone sort of pushing a little bit back from their chairs, perhaps feeling a little nervous that an economist is about to lead with a joke. But let me not do that. But perhaps if we can just tee up the presentation, I will use a few graphs here. So the first in this environment is really a quick catch up on where we are. Right, I'm very pleased to say that over the last sort of days and weeks, it isn't sort of the first thing in the day that we do is sort of tally up the number of new confirmed cases, feel such strain and pain for all of those who have lost loved ones over the previous week and longer. The third wave of COVID here in South Africa is well and truly behind us. We know that it was much longer than the first two. We know that the cost was much more significant, but also in many ways, I think it's fair to say that we managed it better. The challenge as we're down into level 1 lockdown and we're all starting to enjoy sort of this beautiful summer weather around us is to remember that we're frankly not 3 rounds of this thing and done, right? The experience that we're seeing elsewhere in the world, even where vaccination rates are significantly higher, is that we're going through cycles where we restrict activity because new infections and hospitalizations are on the rise, and then periods where that recedes and we're all able to breathe a little bit easier. And certainly our experience here in South Africa, I think, is going to be a little different. The challenge or the focus right now to help see us through ultimately to something that looks more like the end of this rather than the middle of the game is around vaccination. The great news here in South Africa is we've just reached a milestone. We've got a little more than a quarter of all African adults vaccinated. Finally, we've got just about half of all adults in South Africa with at least one dose for those that are having 2-dose vaccinations. That's a long way away from where we were just a couple of months ago, but frankly, it's also an awful long way away from where we need to be. For those of you watching sort of global news flow, the UK is lucky enough to have vaccination rates amongst adults approaching 90%. They're unlucky enough that new daily case counts are not in the thousands, the low thousands like where we are in South Africa right now, and not in sort of the 10,000 range. It's 30 or 40,000 people a day. So it indicates that even vaccination means a more successful vaccination program still leaves us, we need to be very careful, but at least sort of the worst of the outcomes is much better managed in that space. Moving from sort of the health commentary to talk a little bit about where we are in the economy, one of our best friends, I suppose, is those trying to watch data in high frequency for South Africa over the last year and a half or year and 2/3 has been from Google and the Google mobility data. As a reminder, that's data that tracks if you have a smart device with you, a tablet or a phone, frankly, it knows where you live. It's worked out where you work. It knows where hospitals and restaurants and shopping centers are. It knows the major thoroughfares. And so it's able to get a sense of what sorts of activities are taking place. The graphic in front of you starts back in March of last year. So just as we were slipping into the pandemic here in South Africa, the scale sort of on the left-hand side is mobility, it's footfall of movements of people compared to a base period, which was January and early February of 2020. If you can remember that far back, it's sort of seen as the last of the pre-COVID environment. And so the way to read this, to the left of the graphic, in that stripe that's sort of darker red, you can see that for the red line, which is other retail, for the dark line, which is people in workplaces, during level 5 lockdown, we lost almost 4/5 of all activity in those spaces. And then you see as lockdowns ease, and that's the shading of the graph. So the less intense the color of the shading, the less intense the lockdown, we start to see footfall start to return. First and foremost in the orange line, which is grocery and pharmacy. You'll remember, besides sort of stockpiling loo roll and other bits, we never really stopped going to buy stuff, just we went much less frequently and presumably had much larger basket sizes as well. With the Google mobility data, it's suggesting that in grocery and pharmacy, in fact, footfall, at least as compared to January 2020, footfall is even larger now than it was before. Other retail, you're starting to see that same sort of recovery. We're back above that baseline really for the first time since we first slipped into the COVID restrictions back more than a year and a half ago. And even in workplaces. So I'll say, as someone who slipped into the ABSA offices a couple times over the last 2 weeks and sat in a room almost entirely by myself, it's certainly not the case that all workplaces are back in business as usual, but the data suggests that more and more people are moving around and we're all getting a little bit more normal in that space. But to be clear, our expectation is that wave 4 will come, that some level of restrictions will need to be ratcheted up again. Each time we have restrictions in South Africa, I think it's clear that they're a little bit more nuanced. Won't necessarily feel that way if, for example, you are the restaurant industry. It won't necessarily feel that way if you're in the alcohol industry, but certainly evidence that it's more nuanced as we learn more, not just in South Africa, but globally, about what sorts of activities have the largest positive impact on sort of controlling the speed of the spread of the pandemic, and which activities really have the biggest impact on the economic environment, and then trying to do a more nuanced risk reward in that. If we look for where we are right now with regard to consumer spending in the broadest of terms, And we're going to enjoy much more recent, much more thoughtful data from Isana a little bit later. And from the macro perspective, unfortunately, we're sort of stuck using always publicly available information. And often that means we're very much trying to drive a view forward on the economy by looking squarely in the rearview mirror, which is not a great way to do things. But if we think about data at least up to the end of the second quarter, and that's months ago now, but up to the second quarter, what you can see in this pattern is that there's an enormous divergence in sort of the performance in sort of the current environment for different parts of the consumer sector. Now, of course, when this data was pulled in the second quarter of this year, restaurants and hotels were still very much facing pretty strict lockdowns. And so it's no surprise here to see that in volume terms, their business was still down in aggregate about a third from where it was pre-COVID. You can see also clothing and footwear. That's the practical implication of all of us being a little bit slothful over the last year or year and a half, but also a number of sectors, food and non-alcoholic beverages, education, furnishings, people taking a greater interest in their immediate surroundings, having spent a lot more daytime hours in their homes than before. We're seeing extra spending in that space already. And then the biggest of those positive categories won't, I don't think, surprise anybody, just given the nature of how we're meeting today. This is communications, right? And so it's not just everyone's data being blown out by Showmax and Netflix. In a practical way, an awful lot more work, an awful lot more engagement, whether it be for students, or whether it be individuals in their social circles, whether it be business, is using data in online now. And today is a great example of that. There are some challenges though here, and they're very real challenges. So we will know in South Africa that even before COVID, we had a very, very significant employment problem in the country. That is really very tactless language to say we've got nothing like enough jobs. And so you'll see on the headlines of the newspaper once a quarter, when our unemployment data comes out, we will talk about the formal unemployment rate well into the 30s%. We'll talk about youth unemployment being significantly higher. The numbers sometimes, to be fair, I think are quite difficult to really internalize, particularly for those of us directly engaged in work all the time. One way to think about it is just looking across age cohorts. And so this is the graphic in front of you right now, and asking what proportion of adults in that age category have any labor income whatsoever. And so if we look in this graphic, the third sets of bars, 45 to 54 age category. The red bar is back in the middle of the decade, 2015, a little bit arbitrary. The middle, the bronze colored bar, is where we were just before COVID, when our biggest problem was a shrinking economy because we just couldn't get basic things right. And then the third of the bars, the darker one, is the most recent data from the second quarter. You'll see from that age category, 45 to 54, about 3 percentage points of jobs have disappeared. So if almost 61% of people of that age had some labor income before, now we're down to sort of 58. In the sort of middle age category, 35 to 44, the slip is even more significant, from just over 60% down to just under 55%. And then you get this real challenge we have with people earlier in their would-be careers in South Africa, where we've started with not many jobs. In the middle of 2015, barely half of all young adults in South Africa between 25 and 34 had any labor income whatsoever, and that number slipped to barely 4 out of every 10. So that's sort of reflective of the real strain that we see broadly. At the same time, though, in the previous slide, we saw that some forms of spending are certainly up. We're seeing footfall is up as well. And so we want to try to understand is where are the supports for spending, and where might that outlook be in the periods ahead? Well, one of the forms of support here, or one of the challenge, I should say, is or indication of further strain, is just what we're seeing in the credit books. So the graphic in front of you right now is using data from the National Credit Regulator. The red bars are against the right-hand scale, and it's asking sort of in billions of rands how much stuff out there is late. On the left-hand scale, it's asking around the proportion of accounts. And what you're seeing there is that the number of billions of rands that are sort of overdue in terms of formal lending has actually fallen a little bit after a spike early in the crisis. But the number of people, the proportion of accounts that are falling late is getting ever larger. And that speaks to the part of the retail segment that is really looks to be taking some strain. We'll see that in another way on this next sort of pair of slides. First, the support for those without any labor income at all, of course, in many cases is the social wage in South Africa, child support grant, old age pension, and then some of the newer measures reflected in the darker bar here that were introduced as a direct consequence of COVID, trying to get money, sort of direct support into the hands of as many households as possible, not only to try to alleviate the worst strains of sort of abject poverty, but also to generate money and economies in sort of rural communities, in township communities, to make sure the whole thing doesn't lock up. We'll hear more about sort of the future of these payments in early November as the new finance minister sort of tells a difficult story of many pressures for extra spending and at the same time not a lot of extra money to spend it. But maybe the broader point that I think is relevant for people listening on this call is just around sort of how different the experience of households can be in South Africa. So 2 slides ago, we had broken down by age category, sort of an observation that at one level there weren't enough jobs to start with, and now there are kind of fewer. But on the left-hand graphic here, I think it's really telling if we want to understand better different segments of the consumer market, where pain points are likely to be in sort of the outlook going forward, at least from a macro perspective. So the graphic in front of us right now, the yellow line is using an International Labour Organization definition, and it's looking at all those employed in South Africa that are defined as having semi-skilled or low-skilled jobs. And in that space, the good news is pre-pandemic, it was 12 and almost 2/3 million South Africans. On the first of the lockdowns that we had, going from the first quarter of 2020 to the second quarter, near enough 2 million jobs in that space disappeared. 2 million on a base of just over 12.5 million. Some of those have recovered, but as we sat at mid-year this year, we're still about 1.5 million, just shy of 1.5 million down on where we were before. Now that is punishing in those households, not often multiple breadwinners, not often with very significant financial reserves. So there's a big chunk of South Africa taking very real strain. Against that, the second of the lines on the chart is looking at those that have an ILO definition of a high-skilled occupation. Far fewer of those jobs at the starting point, 3.75 million versus 12 and 2/3 million, but effectively unchanged to the downturn. Some industries will have shed a few, some industries will have picked up a few, but a very different outlook for consumer-facing businesses that face that income group versus the income groups that are more vulnerable. And so that helps us understand why overall spending in many categories may look pretty comfortable. It may help us understand why vehicle sales, frankly, have really shot the lights out during this period. It may help us understand where on the weekend newspapers are full again of real estate listings, and it's not just people putting their homes up for sale here on the Highveld, hoping for a different lifestyle near the coast or overseas, but those houses are being snapped up very quickly as well. So there's very clearly 2 dramatically divergent trends depending on what part of the consumer market that you are looking at. Interestingly, for those South Africans that are probably towards the upper end of sort of the spending range, and that is not 50 or 100,000 Rand income worth a month. The upper end of the spending range in South Africa kicks in a lot lower than that. Really, for the first meaningful time in quite a number of years, we're seeing households on a net basis actually save. Now, that might be reflective of their experience. There's only so much that you can shop online for. If you're not able to go a few hours away for a nice domestic holiday, if you're not able to get on a plane and go overseas, that's money saved, right? And the same thing is true in a whole host of other activities. But what this does suggest is that for those households, right, who have managed to keep well-paying jobs, for those households for which a lot of spending opportunities opportunities have diminished over this period, we've got a bunch of savings that might well support spending in that space in the periods ahead. And I think that's quite an important observation. The last two slides before I hand over here, one is just around consumer confidence. Of course, it's wonderful to highlight that there's a bunch of consumers out there for whom their finances aren't as damaged as those who have seen sort of job losses or other strange during this period. But you need them to be confident enough to move from savings to spending. On the left-hand side graphic, it's looking across income groups in South Africa. High income in this survey definition, only 20,000 Rand a month in income, classifies you as a high income earner in South Africa. High, middle and low income earners and their consumer confidence overall, you'll notice it's higher now than it was at the depths of the COVID lockdowns, but it's still a long way below neutral. And that suggests that there's probably some headwinds in terms of spending. On the right-hand side here, it's asking slightly different questions. It's asking on the top line, what is your estimate of your household financial position? Interestingly enough, people's own estimates of their household financial position actually tend to be a little bit positive. It won't surprise you to know that if we broke that down this further by income group, the wealthier in the sample know that their financial position is not too bad, and the least wealthy also know that their financial position is not nearly as good. So the data sort of does what it says on the tin there, but also asking questions about whether it's time to buy durables, right? Making that long-term, often on-credit commitment to buy something today that sometimes you can put off till tomorrow. The data on that side certainly says that people are of the view that they can probably put it off a little bit longer. And then the economic position is their assessment of the direction for the country. And there it sort of waxes and wanes a little bit, but there's still a lot of concern. The last of my slides, and it's going to be a little bit forward looking, I hope, is just around the credit cycle. It's natural for us as ABSA to think about credit cycles, but I should highlight that as a chief economist, I'm on the public side of the business. So I don't make decisions about who's going to get what loan or how open the books are. But what the observation is here is that for non-mortgage loans to households, it's the yellow line in this graph, it's only been growing sort of 2, 3, 4%, despite interest rates being very low and despite inflation being 4, 5 and a bit percent. So in real terms, actually credit growth is negative in that space. The one place where we are seeing a bunch of credit going to households is around sort of mortgages, people looking to take advantage of very low interest rates and buy homes. Again, it talks to very different outlooks for very different parts of the consumer market. Then the very last of my observations here is just a bit of a scary one, but it's around interest rates. So the red line that you're seeing in front of you right now is so for the hypothetical average in South Africa, what proportion of monthly income, monthly disposable income is spent just on servicing debt. So not paying it back, but just on the interest rates. And of course, the two factors in that, right? One is, I guess there's three. One is your income, one is how much debt you have, and one is just what interest rate are you paying on it. And so it's been quite striking. You can see this huge improvement. Down here is an improvement in this graph. You see this huge improvement as the Reserve Bank slashed interest rates as the economy went into tailspin as a consequence of the pandemic. But if you believe what financial markets are pricing in currently, where there's the better part of 250 basis points in increases coming to the repo rate, coming to the prime rate over the next year and a half or so, well, suddenly those same consumers that felt more space in their pocketbook at the end of each month because their car payment was lower, because their bond payment was lower, may well see this go into quick reverse. And so that may generate a strain on consumer spending going forward. That's the end of my opening comments. I want to hand over to Isana now, who's going to talk through some high frequency, quite interesting data. Isana?
Thanks, Jay. Hello, everybody. Just to lay the background in terms of my data. So some of you would have heard the story before, but we have basically at ABSA spent a lot of time to understand what our own data is telling us during lockdown and going forward from our first lockdown. What we do is we look at our card data. When I say card data, it's card acquiring as well as our card issuing data. And in terms of what people are spending, how much they're spending, and what are they spending money on. It has to be noted, though, that this data doesn't include cash. And we know South Africa is a huge cash-driven economy. And obviously, when we look at this data, that portion of the market is not considered. But we also have noted that a lot of the lower LSMs are banked and is becoming more banked as we speak. So the first slide I'm looking at here is just in terms of how the recovery is looking. And right now, consumer spending is recovering strongly. Everything Jeff said is very true. We are very worried about where this money is coming from, but everybody is recovering quite strong during 2021. And in the green line, you can see the compound annual growth rate. So that's where we kind of flatten it out and make it more comparable to previous years. So grocery and supermarket market spending has benefited strongly initially in lockdown, and in the beginning of 2021 has slowed down quite significantly. However, it is coming back because people will always buy food, and we now see a CAGR of about 7%. The interesting thing is, health and beauty category has been very stable throughout the period. It obviously begs the question, what are people spending on? And it has to be more in the pharmaceutical space and in the medicine and health space, and not so much in the beauty. Although we are looking at this category combined, it suggests people are buying things that are healthy for them, medicines, boosting their immune systems. And that is by far the most stable category spending we've seen throughout this period. Tourism has suffered greatly, obviously, during this pandemic, and experiencing the largest decline in spending percentage-wise in 2020. However, we have seen since July of this year that the tide has been starting to turn, and it's going to be interesting to hear Anthony's thoughts on what is driving this. And then obviously the fact that South Africa is now off the UK red list. We're hoping this further enhances our traveling industry, as a lot of our international travel is from the UK as well. Another way of looking at the spending is when we see transportation has taken a knock and is slowly recovering. Again, please remember that this is looking at public transport, but what it's catching what is paid by card and not cash. And we know in South Africa we have a huge public transport part of our industry that pays cash. So yes, it is recovering, but slower than the usual. And then the biggest beneficiary throughout this period has been home and garden, as people kept on spending and is keeping on spending on home improvement. Really talking about the shift in the consumer, and I think we're gonna start diving into that more. As who is this consumer, and how are they making spending decisions, and what are they buying? Because you can see from the home and gardening trend that it's continuing to grow, and as is building and hardware. Gambling has made a strong recovery since the start of the pandemic, and there are two dynamics probably at play. The one is that people have disposable income and they can go out and they can spend, and the other dynamic is that people could be desperate for some luck and job losses. We know that in the past, the two industries that seem to have been most resilient to economic volatility has been alcohol and gambling. So it doesn't operate similarly than other industries traditionally, but it's interesting to note that it is coming back, and there is also a huge comeback in the e-gambling space, or upcome in the e-gambling space. Our clothing spend has also recovered. Now, data is definitely showing people are buying more clothes again. I still think the category change is huge. We're not seeing this obviously in the data as terms of what people are spending on. Mark is on the line today with us from Mr. Price, and he's going to speak a little bit, I believe, about what people are buying in clothing and how that has changed. However, it's interesting to note that the online sales have actually doubled in the clothing category, and we believe that the clothing category is the biggest driver of online sales at the moment. We also took some geospatial data. We work with a consulting firm called IRL. Now, what you see on the screen is 3 lines. The black line is what we call the normalized traveling. So again, similar to what Jeff is looking at from Google's perspective, we just look at it a little bit more specific in terms of how people are moving around. what you see there is the black line is actually the norm. So the normal traveling people did pre-COVID. If you follow the dark blue line, that is the distance traveled. So you can see there around April, we went in the hardest lockdown, that came down drastically. But interestingly enough, this hasn't recovered substantially, even as lockdowns ease. People aren't traveling distance-wise where they used to. However, the light blue line is the mobility, the movement, the frequency of movement. And there you can see it is definitely picking up a lot. And people are moving around much more frequently than they used to pre-lockdown. So this has been dubbed actually the donut effect. And it is this phenomenon has also been seen in Europe. Because it just shows that the movement and the density of movement has gone out of the CBDs into more the surrounding suburbs. And I think that's just in line with where people are working, flexible working hours. They have more ability to pop in and out of stores close by, but not traveling as far as they used to. And as a result, from a retail perspective, what this could mean is that your malls and your shops closer to home in suburbia is getting the benefit of that, but your big regional malls and your into the CBDs potentially keeps on struggling. So what is this changing consumer then we speak about? It's somebody that's now working from home, and that has influenced their lifestyle significantly. I don't know about you, but for me, I mean, I have three hours back in my day, just not traveling to work and back. We have people that you can schedule your life better. So the way they live have significantly altered their behavior in terms of where they shop, when they shop, how they shop. They are also, like we've seen in the health and beauty category, become much more health conscious. They spend a lot more on nutritional products, health products, vitamins. Travel has changed. They're not traveling as far. They're not moving around on holidays as far. And a part of that is that I think consumers have just become very nearsighted. The reality is people don't want to plan too far in the future. You don't know when's the next wave coming, what's government going to do, what's lockdowns going to do. So people are nearsighted. They make plans in the short term, but not so much longer out. So all of this has had a huge social and economical impact. Economical, like Jeff has indicated, we do think that people have, in a way, more money back in their pockets because their lifestyles have changed, and that has impacted what they spend on. But they are also more into simplifying life, personalize my life. It's more about me being an educated consumer, understanding what my needs are and how best to resource for my needs. Just a very uncertain space everybody's living in, and looking at the world very differently, looking at education differently. We see education really struggling to come back. We suspect if you have to go do a study, that a lot of parents are opting for homeschooling. In fact, I'm sure that most of us have heard of parents that now has taken their kids out of school and started homeschooling. So education looking very different. There's a low trust in governments, in corporations. You know, you can basically get a professional argument for anything you want in the media these days. If you believe in the vaccine or not, you can have professionals tell you a good argument on both sides. So that not trusting science, not trusting corporates, not trusting very low trust consumer we're dealing with at the moment, not believing everything they hear, which talks a little bit about word of mouth and how word of mouth and social influencing and my community, my tribe is more trusted in terms of what I buy, how I buy, where I buy. So many consumers just not trusting what's been shown in traditional media and more wanting to know from a personal friend or somebody they trust a good quality product, etc. I just want to also maybe spend one second on talking about the buying local and adding to what Jeff said in terms of our economy, and our biggest problem historically, and even more so, is the lack of jobs. And you got to ask, and I've been speaking about this quite a lot in some of my publications, but you got to ask is how do we then incentivize consumers to buy local? If we can get consumers to buy more local produce, that will increase jobs. Effectively, it will increase jobs because we will produce more, have a bigger demand to produce more locally. And I think one thing that we've learned in COVID is if you look at e-commerce and how all our retailers were gearing up towards a world of e-commerce and omni-channel. However, when the consumer started wanting it, the world changed very quickly to a point where they weren't geared enough. Now, that just begs to the question is, who's driving consumer behavior? Consumer needs to be incentivized to change their behavior. They need to be incentivized to shop what they shop for and where they shop. And therefore, I think a big thing is going to be how corporates and governments take hands and say, how do we incentivize our consumer to buy local produce? Not just a campaign, but actually buying local. So that was just my 2 cents on jobs and why I think that's a big thing. But I want to close off by just saying that, you know, facing the future, you are, I think, retailers and everybody serving the consumer directly, and all of us that actually also serve the consumer indirectly, needs to understand you're dealing with a consumer that has a different mindset, that doesn't necessarily have a great future outlook on the country, that have low trust in government, that have huge levels of stress and anxiety just of the trauma that they've been through over the last time, reduced income in households. And you've got to ask then, how does that impact their behavior? They are minimalistic, they risk adverse, they have less trust, we've spoken about, and they are more likely to listen to trusted sources than to governments or corporates driving marketing campaigns to do what they say they must do. So really the response, I think, is to build credibility and reliability with our consumers, to have humanistic and purpose-driven values and how we act as corporates and how we present ourselves, and then to drive optimistic and solution-driven approaches that our consumers can buy into and give them guidance along the way. So I'm going to stop there, and because I really want to get into the questions part, and I'm going to kick off with Anthony from Sun International. Welcome, Anthony. I think, you know, it's your industry, like I said before, is one industry that, especially in the gambling side, haven't really felt the ups and downs of economic volatility like this last year and a half now. So I want to ask how the consumer behavior throughout all these various lockdowns, you can paint us a little story about how that's impacted your business, both in the gambling and also in the tourism side, and how you have experienced this from a corporate perspective.
Thanks, Isana. Yeah, it's been a pretty tough year for us. Clearly, obviously, when you're in lockdown, you've got zero revenue. So it was in those circumstances, there's little you can do and you get absolutely nothing. But as restrictions are lifted, and we've been through various ones where you had alcohol bans, and alcohol in our industry is quite important, and it does stimulate some activity, and then you've got reduced hours. And those have a massive impact, and particularly when you've got a curfew at about 8 o'clock. Generally, people like to go out, they get back from work from 6 and probably only going out at 7, and then we got to close at 8. So those sort of things have a massive impact. So every time there's been a change in our additional trading time for us, it's made a big impact on our revenues. We can see it almost immediately. And it's quite funny because our business, there's almost 2 sides to our gaming business, or 3. There's the casinos, there's the online, and there's the LPM business. Now the casino side has really been hit the hardest, and I think that's really about restricted hours, alcohol sales, and those sort of things. Whereas in the LPM business, which is more your pubs and clubs, actually been very resilient, other than when there's no alcohol sales, because clearly pubs close unless they can serve food, and then we drop off immediately. So we've had reduced capacity on the casino side, whereas the LPM business with only 5 slots, you can actually manage a lot better from a capacity constraint. So that business is actually trading above 2019 levels currently, whereas the casinos are still slightly below 2019 in most places. So both have been quite different. Online has, on the other hand, exploded quite strongly because clearly people did move it online, particularly during lockdowns. And we've introduced new products such as live games, which is basically betting on roulette and baccarat and those sort of games. So that has added to our portfolio and certainly done a lot better.
Thanks, Anthony. Just for our audience, you are welcome to send through questions as we go along. Jeff is going to look at your questions and interject if he gets a good one. So please do send in your questions. Mark, what is your view of and the most prominent shift in your business with regards to consumer behavior that you have noticed since 2020 and in the retail industry in general, in your opinion?
Thanks, Anna. Thanks for having me. And I think Jeff said a little bit earlier, for every person's woe, there's someone else. I mean, Anthony, I feel for him, for every person's woe, there's someone else who's gaining. And I think when you aren't, we've definitely been a recipient of the booze ban, the travel restrictions, the entertainment, that, and it all correlates to what Jeff was having in his slides, that disposable income when, particularly, I don't know what Anthony's feeling, but when you try to bring people back to work and they're saying, no, but I can't come back to work now because my transport money that I was using, now I'm saving, and in fact, and all of that extra liquidity in the market makes a big difference to people like us, who particularly South Africans, most South Africans, as you know, they don't live the most lavish lives. They don't have cars, they don't have houses. So for us, fashion and making people look and feel good, and Anthony's, and the entertainment industry is about escaping from a world where that particularly, people find, quite hard, and so I think, these things will change, and I think the behavioral economics around this is going to be very interesting, because I think it's gonna flow, and it's gonna ebb and flow, and I'm sure our biggest worry is Anthony's biggest gain, I think, because as soon as he starts opening up, their wallets are going to flow naturally towards those same channels again. I don't think things are going to change. But people want, I think there's probably going to be we're actually anticipating an over-indexing of those things, which is obviously, we need to be, but hopefully they're wearing our kit when they go to Anthony's hotels. Yeah, and I think, we've noticed basket sizes are much bigger, but transactions are lower. Very much like you say, frequency of shop is and the localization of people around their central hub. I think I can't remember who did this radius study. I think it was R&B. They were talking about how the radius of people's travel time is cut down by 20-30%. So I think people are making shorter sprints into these places. They've got a lot more mobility and that flexibility, and I think that opens up headspace for people to think more about retail. Albeit, I'm not saying that we're in any shape or form where we would love to be. I think you're fighting a very flat economy, no matter what you're up against. So it's a really competitive, and you have to be better than your competition. And I think that's what we're trying to double down on, is just continue to add really good value to the customer every day. And hopefully we can win on that. And brand is very important. Like you talked about trust. Brand trust we're finding that it's an absolute imperative, and so those are some of the things I could go on. Grant money is it's big. In our economy, it just runs by this. We can see a direct effect when grant money comes out the market or in the market. That basic income grant, I think, is going to be very good for the economy, albeit someone's going to have to pay for it. So I think these are some of the challenges that we've got on a drug from last year. With Time Drug, we've got on this money drug, which is free airdropped money. And I think these things are really, they're structural in nature, which I'm sure Jeff will say is a challenge, when you're not creating jobs.
I agree, Mark, and it's interesting when you say that, because I think often we think of everything in pockets, but what COVID has certainly taught us is there's a knock-on effect for everybody. If your people can't go out, they don't spend on clothing, and they don't feel good, and Yeah, just the knock-on effect is huge. If alcohol's not being sold, then they don't go to casinos, because what's the point, you know? So it's just it's become very hard to manage and anticipate what behavior is driving and how it's going to go forward. But what is your, still we're staying with you, Mark, what is your strategic issues and that you had to adjust for in terms of supply chain, e-commerce, and even sustainability, how you look at these things post-COVID versus pre-COVID? What was the impact on your actual strategic moves, if I may say, and future planning when it comes to these issues?
I think you're talking to almost business model at some level, you know, and I think everyone's business model has had to be re-baselined. And if you thought you were successful in an old world, does the new world look like that anymore? I mean, I think someone spoke about, you know, e-commerce doubling, and so, you know, ours was 1.5% of our sales was e-commerce. It's now 3% now, you know, and so it's a small number, but it's growing. The compounding of how fast these things are changing, and we luckily made some big bets early, and that set us up well for e-commerce and the ability to deliver. But take a small thing like customer care. We never anticipated ramping up customer care to the extent to which we had to. You know, and now that you got this online activity, you might be infrastructurally, you might be fine, and you got all that, but now you've got another whole problem on your hands where you've got a customer care line which also got COVID restrictions and people from, you know, so these are challenges that you've had to change and shift your business model with the channel change. And so that's been something that we've had to work on. New DCs, I mean, the riots, it's not a question that you've posed, but that's also created a big dynamic that where do you invest your infrastructural spend? Do you own stuff, or don't you own stuff? So I think those are some business model change, and obviously they impact the supply chain directly. You know, the South African supply chain has been affected by China, and affected now on a global level on the shipping lines and the major container shortages. I mean, it's well known. You know, there's been over 300-400, nearly 500% increase in container prices. You know, so when you're trying to move that inflation onto the customer in a very flat market with no jobs, someone's got to pay. You know, that's the problem. Can you pass that margin on across? Can you sustain your business? How do you cut? You know, how do you perform and transform at the same time? These are really tough. And then you've got things like sustainability, where I'm sure, I don't know if Anthony gets the same heat that we do about this ESG agenda. You know, and it's obviously very noble, and we obviously all trying to be the best we can, but you know, that drives cost, and it drives more cost into a business, which you have to transfer that cost on to the customer. And again, a customer that isn't necessarily able to absorb that cost inflation, you know. And so our business is about delivering value, and so we have to drive our cost all the time. And so we've had to double down on those activities, and you know, robotic process automation. You know, Isana, I'm passionate about, you know, just digitizing the business. And we've had to double down on those type of activities, but again, that's not great because it displaces jobs, you know. And this is a really tough conundrum that we stuck with as a country. But we have to do it in order to have better and competitive business models.
Well, Mark, yeah, I think you raise a few very important points there. We can go on about localization and how that will drive businesses. You know, business back to South Africa, but I think just the cost inflation of what you're having to deal with. I know Mr. Price specifically had a huge localization and buying locals strategy even before COVID. I mean, I can imagine how that has just accelerated as a result of the cost of importing and bringing things from China. So I'm happy to say that Mr. Price really is becoming a bigger local producer of clothing, and you know, it's just lovely to see, because I do think sometimes, I think I heard ShopRite say that, you know, how many jobs they've been able to create in the online space through the ticker 6060. So it always, this is us as humans, we also want to focus on what opportunities there are in the midst of all this conundrums and problems we're facing, but it begs for new business models, and I think that's the point. And Anthony, from an online perspective, even you from a business model had to adapt quite rapidly in Sunbet and how that division took off. Do you want to maybe give us a little bit of insight about that?
Yeah, look, I think a little bit like Mark, it's still relatively small in our portfolio, but when you look at the growth, it has been phenomenal, and we're obviously going to push more resources in that way. We do see there's a little bit of a different market. The casino, people want to go to casino, they want to go out, and I think Hope Mark's right, because there should be a bounce back, I think, coming our way, and we certainly expect it. But I didn't touch a little bit on the hotel side earlier, and I think that's also quite important, even on the online. So we're trying to, look at our business and say, how do we change channel costs? And I think, booking engines, these OTAs are very expensive. And we recently just went off the OTAs for Sun City, and you have to book directly through our website now or through travel agents. And, we're going to save a lot of money. But that's key in upping our online presence and making sure that people, go the right channels to book. I think leisure, fortunately for us, has bounced back, because at the moment, corporate business is really missing. It's just not there. And certainly international isn't either. So fortunately, I think, and all the stats that Jeff put up, it's showing it exactly in our numbers, that the leisure spend, the local travel has picked up quite strongly, and September was pretty good for us. It's still not quite where we need to be, but with missing segments like corporate midweek and international, it's actually very good. So October, the rest of the year, we expect quite a good period, particularly at a place like Sun City. And then when we look further out, definitely international's coming back. But certainly, again, it's critical. All channels, all costs, how we do business has changed over COVID, and I think that's critical. And as I've said, automation is critical at the moment, and we do spend a lot of time in that area. As I said, direct and rebookings, more digital marketing, looking at how we market digitally as well, has made a massive change to our business, and cost, and a lot of it's also jobs as well, which is obviously also a challenge.
Do you have a question perhaps from the audience before I camp on?
There is, Isana. The question sort of mostly directed towards Mark, but I think, Anthony, with your comment there may be a component here for you as well. And it's a question around sort of the wider South African retail market, and asking about whether it's open to e-commerce or whether we're really seeing people have a preference for in-person shopping.
I think it's shifting, and obviously the numbers are saying it's shifting fast. I think there are some structural issues in South Africa that we're not going to get around in a hurry. One is that most people in South Africa don't have an address. That's a challenge. You can't do door to door without an address. So what we found, I think 70% of our online orders are click and collect. So our stores have become a different thing. It's become a destination for a different purpose. And obviously the versatility and what we're trying to do is drive, because you talked about shifting business models. You don't send your assortment to every single store because your stores aren't all the same size. So how do you effectively service a customer that's not, you're not sending all the same stuff to the same place, but where they want to be and where they want to shop is there. So these are some of the logistics challenges we're going to have to, or we are grappling with in a much, obviously a rapid rate. So I think click and click, to answer just your question about the store and its relevance, because I think it's relevant to e-commerce, is an ally to the customer. Mr. Price and what South African consumer, because they live in not the most amazing homes, the shopping centre, albeit the footfall's is coming back hard in our super regionals. You're starting to see the footfall really start coming back and strongly. Most people see the shopping mall as an escape from where they are, and the fact is that the whole environment is very appealing for the average person in South Africa, and they see it as part of their entertainment, they see it as part of their lifestyle, and so I don't think that's going to change. I think it's just going to start to merge, and they're going to start to shop a lot more on mobile. We've seen the application of mobile and just the browsing just accelerate, but the store environment is not going away, I don't think, in South Africa for quite a long time, but I do think there will be a different correlation and causation between the adoption of mobile phones and smartphones in particular, and obviously how e-commerce takes root. I don't know if I answered your question. I hope I did.
I think so. And if I might, Isana, if I may take the opportunity for a follow-up, it's around sort of supply chains. The newspapers are talking about disruption. Originally, it was containers in the wrong place, and then freight rates went through the roof. In a practical way, right? How are you finding it to manage sort of supply? Are the delays going to cause you difficulties sort of getting the right product at the right time during the window in which you can sell it? Is there an opportunity here for localization? How long do you think the disruptions around transport are likely to last?
You know, the challenge with, I've obviously got to talk with quite carefully. So that's why I hesitated. The supply chains out of China are obviously disrupted. It's quite common knowledge. It's not the we've got quite an agile model. Over 50% of our assortment comes from South Africa, and we front load a lot of our stock anyway. So I think you know the festive season we would have already been quite okay with, and I think we find and we've obviously booked contracts in advance. So I think from that perspective, on the shipping lines and stuff, we feel like we're in a good position. I think it's when it really comes to next year and how does that sort of unfold, and how quickly can China's electricity and challenges there come back online, and then what does it look like after that, and what does manufacturing look like? To come back to the question, so I think China is a competitive zone, and that whole Bangladesh, Vietnam, you know, these are low cost producers of stuff. And when you're a value retailer like us, we have to, our whole mandate is to drive. We start with price. What do we think that the consumer can stomach? And we re-engineer product in order to get. This is very different to other retailers who they're a cost plus business. We're not a cost plus business. We understand our customer, we understand where they are, and what price they can digest, and then we go after that and we engineer. And fashion is a very complex game. It's not like a white t-shirt, and South Africa doesn't have that capabilities in here. And to bring those capabilities plus the labor challenges, if there was no basic, and this is what we obviously having discussions with governments about, is if you didn't have bargaining power in wages and you just were able to put it at competitive wage rates, we would put 100% of our assortment in South Africa. But not only do you not have the capabilities, but the cost per unit is just too high. Even with the duty structures and stuff, it's just not competitive and not reliable enough right now. So I think that's. We'd love to, and we are definitely, and we almost do 80 million to 100 million units is our target, you know. I think we're going to do 80 million units this year through South Africa. So it's not like Mr. Price's t-shirt business could fuel most of South Africa's, industry, textile industry. Yeah. So yeah, we move a huge amount of units. Between us and Pepco, we probably could revitalize the industry, no problem. Yeah. But there are some structural things that we need to get past.
I think this is why the holding of hands and the working together with government and even between corporates is going to be crucial. If it was crucial before, it's even more crucial now. But I am conscious of time, and I can sit here and ask questions, I think, Jeff, the whole day. But maybe as a closing question to you both, and we can start with your answer, Anthony, and given that the consumer behavior is so unpredictable, how much are you starting to depend in your businesses, respective businesses, on data and predictive modeling of data to drive decision making and prepare your delivery to market, if for lack of a better word? Maybe your response first, Anne.
Look, it's not massive, but certainly our data is critical to us. So when we look at our customers, who they are and where they're from, that is very, very important data, and especially on the online space as well as the casino space. On the leisure, where we're trending to and what's happening in the broader sort of travel trends and where our customers are coming from, so we can start marketing different destinations. That's critical. But holistically, I think data is critical, but it's more about our existing customer base, how they're feeling, where they're spending, and where they're behaving. But not much more than that at this stage.
Are you asking me as well?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, okay. So, sorry. Yeah, to me,
I know
think
you look at data, so.
Yeah. No, I mean, I could go on for another hour on data. I think data is and analytics is table stakes, and businesses that don't have that as a competency are going to find themselves in a really tough space soon. I think retail is the right product, right customer, right place, right time. Cuts out waste, and I think a lot of people are doing stuff by feel, and a lot of stuff is done by experience. And I think there's an augmentation that can only happen through the marrying of data and people. And I think there's a lot of maturity in South Africa in particular that we need to. To be honest, I think the more competition that comes into the market in South Africa, and the more listed companies that come on. I don't think we've listed a company outside of Dis-Chem, I think, recently for a very long time, and that is meaningful. And I think we need more companies to get listed, and that's going to increase competition, and that's going to force business models to transform, and that's where you're going to see data and analytics to really have to, that'll be the difference between businesses, I think, in the future.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Anthony. Thanks, Jeff. I agree with Mark. We can speak about this the whole day. I think we've just scratched the surface, and there's so much more to think about and to say on the topic. But I listened to Pick n Pay's results this morning, and I loved what the CEO said when he said that, we are at a critical juncture. And I think as South Africans and as corporates, this is exactly where we are. We are at a critical juncture in our business models, in how we serve the market and how we work together and how we create jobs. And all of these things have all of a sudden all came into the mix right at the same time. And I suppose time will tell how we handle all of that. Thank you, everybody. It was lovely. And thank you for coming on, Anthony and Mark, and spending time with us.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Africa is a continent open to possibility, which comes to life when those with ambition and courage find the right partner. A partner with the tenacity to stand by them and light up a continent. With the experience and unique insights to go beyond limits, Absa Group Limited is that partner. We are synonymous with stability, transparency, and innovative thinking in financial services based on a legacy of 100 years of seamless execution across Africa. Our new brand and growth strategy define how we are shaping our destiny as a proudly African bank, inspired by Africanacity. This is the distinctly African ability to always find ways to get things done. Africanacity is what drives us, what sets the tone for our business, and echoes across our African footprint. Our corporate and investment banking business challenges limits. We close distances, connecting people to opportunities across borders, languages, and cultures. With global connectivity and local differentiation, we operate at the core of your strategy. Our understanding of each unique environment across regulatory and market practices results in a differentiated service and experience for our broad range of clients. Backed by insights into key sectors, we turn risks into opportunities, supported by a unique set of solutions that work across your full value chain. Our clients experience a seamless partnership across Africa, with aligned delivery positioning you for success across operating environments. Because African ingenuity and tenacity go beyond limits, so do we. Our world-class service is based on skills and expertise that have been developed to put our clients first, proven by numerous high-profile deals and coveted international awards. We are brave, we are passionate, we are ready. We are independently African, and we believe in building courageous partnerships that work. When you have the bravery to imagine and the will to get things done, that's Africanacity, that's Absa. Corporate and Investment Banking.